In the previous video, we looked at a devastating accident in Brazil where the pilots involved lost control of their plane just seconds after takeoff. For some of those who investigated the accident, they looked into the possibility of misconfiguration of the aircraft being a possible cause. Of course, that was not the case there, but it does beg the questions of what does misconfiguration of a plane mean? And is it implied that such thing has happened before? The answer to the latter being yes, numerous times in fact. And we'll look at one of those incidents today. The accident of Northwest Airlines Flight 255 was devastating for the city of Detroit. Let's break down what happened that day and just where things went wrong. The date was August 16, 1987. Detroit's Metropolitan Airport is one of the largest airports in the United States. Currently today, it is a hub for Delta Airlines. Prior to their 2010 acquisition of Northwest Airlines, they too operated a hub out of Detroit. Northwest Airlines was at one point one of the largest airlines in the country. Northwest had acquired 9 McDonnell Douglas MD-80 airplanes following their own merger with Republic Airlines in 1986. Northwest would go through the process of rebranding these planes over time, but the accident plane in question had not fully gone through that rebranding. Though bearing Northwest titles, it still partially retained the blue and white livery of Republic Airlines by the time of the accident. The MD-80 was an incredibly popular plane. Following the success of the DC-9, its general design was brought forward into the development of the MD-80 series. Nearly 1,200 of these planes were delivered to airlines across the world, a large number of them flying in the United States for various airlines. The plane was popular with pilots and passengers alike, maybe aside from those unfortunate to be seated at the back of the plane next to the engines. The pilots of this MD-80 were in the middle of a cross-country trip, having flown all afternoon on August 6, 1987. The plane departed Minneapolis, flying to Saginaw, Michigan, before arriving in Detroit. From there, the plane was expected to fly direct to Phoenix, Arizona as their final stopover before again continuing on to Orange County Airport in California. The pilots themselves consisted of 57-year-old Captain John Mouse. He was who we might call a by-the-book captain. He was considered among his work colleagues at Northwest Airlines to be a very competent pilot. And he certainly had the experience to back that up, with flight hours totaling nearly 21,000 across many different aircraft over the years. The much younger first officer was flying with him that day, 35-year-old David Dodds. He too was also described as being an above-average pilot, according to how the accident report details out reviews of his flying abilities from other pilots at Northwest. In the MD-80, Dodds actually had more time in the plane than his captain, 1,600 hours compared to the captain's 1,300. At 7:42 p.m. that evening, Flight 255 arrived and parked at the gate at Detroit. Interestingly, it is noted that during the arrival into the gate, they had actually taxied past and missed their gate and needed to turn 180 degrees to get to where they needed to be. There was a turnaround period at Detroit of around 50 minutes, which would put them behind schedule. During that time, the captain left the flight deck to perform the aircraft walkaround. The first officer stayed in the plane. By 8:30, the pilots were ready to head back out again. Flight 255 was parked at gate D15. In the years since the accident, Detroit Metropolitan Airport has undergone a massive airport redesign in terms of airport layout. The terminal, which existed in 1987, has long since been demolished. This explains the older photograph that has been used here. D15 was on the northwest side of the airport. The pilots were given taxi instructions to head out to runway 03 center. This actually went against the crew's original plan to take off from runway 21 left. Around this time, the weather had begun shifting. Runway operations were using the other end of the 3 runways at the airport, but this changed to 03 once new weather information came through. Thunderstorms were reported to be in the area, and it had begun to rain. The cockpit voice recording transcript reveals that weather was the topic of conversation on the ground. With the change in the runway, new performance calculations needed to be made. Runway 03 Center was the shortest runway at the airport, and they needed to check if they could actually use it with a fully loaded plane. The workload for the pilots began to mount, and they were already over half an hour behind schedule. On top of that, the pilots would make another taxiing mistake, missing a turning. The conversation in the cockpit then turned on where the pilots needed to direct the plane to get to the runway. The most critical takeaway from this is that in the mounting pressure the pilots were facing, a plane behind schedule, getting lost on the taxiway, incoming poor weather, all of this amounted to a crucial mistake by the pilots. They never performed the taxi checklist. The job of a pilot requires the familiarization of numerous checklists. These range from the initial powering on of a plane right up to parking a plane after landing. There's checklists for engine startup, after takeoff, before landing, engine fires, and so on. There is also a checklist for during the taxi phase before takeoff. When investigators listened to the cockpit voice recording, they never heard the pilots run through this checklist. Here is a copy of a Northwest Airlines MD-80 checklist, identical to the one the pilots would have had on board their plane. The very first item on the taxi checklist is to set the flaps to the required position. The second phase of flaps on the MD-80 is 11 degrees. This is how the plane should have been configured for takeoff. Evidence from the cockpit recording and the recovered center console with the flap lever set to 0 degrees suggest that the flaps were never set at all. To understand why this is such a big problem, we need to know what the flaps do. As described in previous videos, flaps are, in simple terms, extensions of the wings. The flaps can either be on the trailing edge, which are called flaps, but also on the leading edge, which are called slats. They make the wing physically bigger by increasing its surface area. The bigger wing will provide more lift, which on modern passenger planes is basically essential on every takeoff. When the performance calculations were made by the pilots, they would have calculated an optimal takeoff speed. The output value takes into account the flap position. If a pilot calculates a takeoff speed with a flap position of 11 degrees and attempts to take off at that speed without extending the flaps, it could very easily cause some problems, which is exactly what happened here. At 8:42, Flight 255 was given clearance to taxi onto the runway and hold position. There was a delay of a few minutes to allow spacing for traffic already using the runway. At 8:44, Northwest 255 was cleared for takeoff, the pilots seemingly unaware they have forgotten a critical step in configuring their plane for takeoff. Still, the takeoff roll commenced. For the first few seconds of the takeoff roll, the pilots were distracted by their autothrottle not engaging. They were soon able to get it to work moments later though. At precisely 8:44 and 57 seconds, the first officer called the rotation speed and the captain began lifting the plane into the air. For eyewitnesses on the ground, in other planes, and in the control tower, the takeoff would have looked rather sluggish. 7 seconds later, as the plane had barely even climbed, the stick shaker stall warning activated. Without the flaps extended, the plane's wings cannot generate enough lift to climb. What follows is how the plane crashed into the ground. The pilots struggled with controlling the plane in their final moments. The MD-80 begins rolling sharply, first to the left, then to the right. Having just flown beyond the end of the runway, and with barely any altitude, the left wing strikes a lamppost inside the parking lot of a car rental center, followed by another impact with a building in the parking lot ahead. Seconds later, the plane crashed onto Middle Belt Road. Skidding along the roadway, the MD-80 impacted a railroad overpass where it exploded. The aircraft was completely obliterated. 154 people on board Flight 255 were killed. Accounting for 2 further ground fatalities, 156 people lost their lives that day. There was, however, one survivor, a 4-year-old girl who recovered from the crash but lost her family that day. The thing is, There is supposed to be a warning system that would tell pilots that their plane was not configured for takeoff. It's called the Takeoff Configuration Warning System, or TCWS for short. It can signal if, on takeoff, the flaps are not set, stabilizer trim is in the incorrect position, if the parking brake is set, and so on. So why didn't the Takeoff Configuration Warning System sound to alert the pilots that something was wrong? After all, a scenario like this is why the system exists in the first place. There is not an answer that is definitively certain, but there is a theory. The TCWS had developed a reputation among pilots as being particularly annoying. It being a warning system, it is designed to catch a pilot's attention, and with the misconfiguration of the flaps, it should have sounded something like this. Investigators never heard this sound on the voice recording. It is also a redundant system. It's not something that pilots should rely on, as their job is supposed to require them to execute the appropriate checklists correctly. It had been known that pilots would pull the circuit breaker relating to the TCWS as to not trigger it, causing a nuisance. It's believed that this is what might have happened here. Supposedly, this is backed up by a buildup of finger markings on the circuit breaker evident on the accident plane. So when the pilots tried to take off with their flap position set to 0 degrees, the system that was supposed to alert them of the problem could not function. If you are a long-time viewer of the channel, what you have heard today may sound a bit familiar. That is because basically, the same disaster occurred 21 years later on August 20th, 2008. In near identical circumstances, Spanair Flight 5022 crashed just seconds after taking off from Madrid in Spain. A further 154 people were killed in that accident. To learn more, consider watching the video we already have on this. Northwest Airlines merged into Delta Airlines in 2010. The McDonnell Douglas MD-80 is a plane that has since been phased out from most fleets. While some can still be found in passenger service, their time as the backbone of fleets in America has long since ended. Hello everyone, thanks once again for watching this video. This one was requested by a whole bunch of people a little while ago. Glad to have finally gotten around to it. If you found this video to be interesting, be sure to be subscribed, as there is always a new video every Saturday. A big thanks to my patrons over on Patreon for their amazing ongoing support to the channel. Their names are scrolling on the screen right now, so if you see your name here, a massive thanks to you. If you yourself want to support the channel further, consider joining the Disaster Breakdown Patreon from just £1 per month, and the link to that will be in the pinned comment below. All patrons get early access to all new content 48 hours before it goes out publicly on YouTube. We also have 2 new Patreon shoutouts to give this week. A massive thanks to Fat Orange Cat and Sandro Cuccia, I hope I said that right, for pledging. Thanks so much. Anyway, that is it from me this week. It's been a long one with extra content and all that, but I will leave this video here. If you want to, my personal Twitter will be linked in the description of this video if you want to follow me on there. Thanks so much for watching, have a great day, and I will see you next week. Goodbye!